The O.T.O and the Secret of Sex Magic. The full story of Crowley's occult order. There are names in history that are more than just names. They are legends, whispers, warnings. Few are more potent, more charged with darkness and light, than Aleister Crowley. He was called the Great Beast 666, a title he gleefully embraced. He was branded by the press as the wickedest man in the world. To his detractors, he was a charlatan, a libertine, a black magician who left a trail of ruined lives in his wake. To his followers, he was a prophet, a genius, a spiritual liberator who brought forth a new law for humanity. But a prophet needs a church. A revelation needs a vessel. And Crowley, a man who despised all established authority, would find his in the strange, secretive corridors of a German occult order. An order that claimed to hold the supreme secret of all magic, a key to unlocking the divine power hidden within the human body. They called themselves the Ordo Templi Orientis, the O.T.O. This is the story of a collision. The story of a man who would become a law unto himself, and the secret society he would hijack, shatter, and rebuild in his own image. It is a history of magic and ritual, of sex and secrecy, and of how a strange German fraternity became the church for the most controversial magician of the 20th century. To understand the story of the Ordo Templi Orientis in the 20th century, we must first understand the man who would become its prophet and its antichrist, the figure who would shatter and remake it in his own image. Before we can explore the order, we must first explore the man. For his life story is the key that unlocks everything that followed. His name was Edward Alexander Crowley, but he would choose another name for himself, a name from the Book of Revelation, the Great Beast 666. He was not born into darkness. He was born into a world of absolute, suffocating light. Crowley entered the world in 1875, in the genteel English town of Royal Leamington Spa. His family was not just wealthy, they were devout. His father, Edward Crowley Sr., had retired from a successful brewing business to live as a traveling preacher for an exclusive and intensely fundamentalist Christian sect known as the Plymouth Brethren. The world of the Plymouth Brethren was one of stark, unyielding certainty. The Bible was the literal, inerrant word of God. The world was a fallen place, a battleground between God and Satan. Humanity was divided into two distinct camps: a tiny flock of the saved, like themselves, and the vast, unredeemed masses of the damned. There was no room for doubt, no space for nuance, no tolerance for worldly pleasure. Crowley's childhood was a relentless immersion in scripture, hymns, and the constant, terrifying threat of eternal damnation. This childhood of extreme piety was the perfect crucible for a great rebel. Crowley developed a profound and visceral hatred for the faith of his father. He saw its God as a cruel and arbitrary tyrant, its morality as a system of life-denying repression. When his father died when Crowley was just 11, he later wrote, "The death of my father lost me my faith. More accurately, it set him free. Now the heir to a considerable family fortune, he embarked on a lifelong mission to systematically defy, desecrate, and dismantle every tenet of the religion that had imprisoned his youth. His rebellion began in earnest at Cambridge University. He changed his name from Edward Alexander to the more ancient Gaelic Aleister. He threw himself into every pursuit that his brethren upbringing had forbidden. He became a poet of considerable skill, publishing lavish, privately printed volumes of his work, much of it steeped in the decadent, erotic, and blasphemous spirit of poets like Swinburne. He sought out physical extremes, becoming a world-class mountaineer. He was not a casual climber. He was a serious and fearless adventurer who participated in pioneering and often disastrous expeditions to the world's highest and most dangerous peaks, from the Alps to the Himalayas. It was a pursuit that required immense discipline, courage, and a powerful will to conquer the raw, untamed forces of nature. He also explored the extremes of human sexuality with a voracious and unapologetic appetite. He engaged in numerous affairs with both men and women, treating sex not as a sin, but as a sacrament of liberation, a powerful tool for self-discovery. His life was becoming a calculated performance of transgression, a systematic inversion of the values he had been taught. But this was more than just the hedonism of a wealthy young man. A profound mystical experience in Stockholm in 1896 convinced Crowley that his path was not just one of worldly rebellion, but of spiritual revolution. He became convinced of the reality of a hidden, magical universe, a world of secret forces and higher intelligences that lay behind the veil of mundane reality. He realized his life's true will was to master the science of this hidden world, the art of magic. He spelled it with a K at the end, magic, to distinguish it from the stage trickery of conjurers. For Crowley, magic was the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. It was a rigorous, psychological, and spiritual discipline for exploring the deepest levels of the self and making contact with the divine. His search for a practical system of magical training led him, inevitably, to the doors of the most sophisticated and respected magical society of its day, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. In November of 1898, he was initiated as a neophyte, taking the magical name Frater Perdurabo, Brother I Will Endure. Crowley was a magical prodigy. The Golden Dawn's curriculum, a complex synthesis of Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, and ritual, was the system he had been searching for. While other members spent years slowly working their way through the grades, Crowley attacked the material with a furious and brilliant intensity. He quickly mastered the theoretical knowledge and showed a profound, intuitive genius for the practice of ritual. He saw the power and the beauty of the system that its founders had created. But he also saw its weakness. He grew to despise what he perceived as the timid, cautious, and bourgeois morality of the Order's London leadership, men like the celebrated poet W.B. Yeats. They were, in his view, mystics and scholars who were afraid of the very powers they claimed to be studying. They wanted to talk about magic. Crowley wanted to do it, to push it to its absolute limits, regardless of the consequences. His ambition, his transgressive lifestyle, and his open contempt for the Order's leadership created immediate and intense conflict. The adepts of the London Temple saw him as a dangerous and unbalanced force, a black magician, interested only in personal power. When Crowley presented himself as ready for initiation into the Order's secret inner circle, the Second Order, they refused him. They judged him morally and spiritually unfit. This rejection was a declaration of war. Crowley, feeling betrayed and underestimated, allied himself with the Order's increasingly autocratic chief in Paris, MacGregor Mathers. This alliance would trigger the Great Schism of 1900, a magical and legal battle that would tear the Golden Dawn apart. Crowley had played a central role in destroying the very order that had given him his magical education. He had proven himself to be one of its most brilliant students, but he had also made himself a pariah. He had mastered the most powerful magical system in the world, but he no longer had a temple. He was a master without a school, a prophet without a church. His journey now took him to the ends of the earth. He traveled to Mexico, to India, to Ceylon, studying yoga and Buddhism, continuing his mountaineering, and pushing his magical experiments to new and more dangerous extremes. He was a lawgiver in search of a law, a prophet waiting for his revelation. In 1904, that revelation would come. While on his honeymoon in Cairo with his new wife, Rose, a series of strange events convinced Crowley that he was being contacted by a higher intelligence. This being, who named itself Iwas, and who Crowley would later identify as his own holy guardian angel, proceeded to dictate to him a new sacred text, a new gospel for humanity. This text, Liber El Vel Legis, the Book of the Law, would become the cornerstone of Crowley's life and work. It announced the dawning of a new spiritual age, the Aeon of Horus, an age of individual sovereignty and freedom, and it gave to Crowley the central tenet of his new philosophy, a phrase that would define his entire legacy. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Crowley now saw his life's mission with absolute clarity. He was no longer just a magician or a rebel. He was the prophet of the new Aeon. But a prophet needs followers. A new law needs a community to practice it. Crowley had the revelation, but he still lacked the vehicle to transmit it to the world. He had no idea that at that very moment, a secretive German fraternity, with its own strange history and its own supreme secret, was quietly developing. A fraternity that would, in a few short years, provide the perfect, ready-made vessel for his new law. While Aleister Crowley was forging his own fiery path climbing the Himalayas, battling with Yeats in the Golden Dawn, and receiving his own prophetic law in Cairo another, quieter magical stream was carving its own course through the complex landscape of continental Europe. This was a movement born not of radical, individualistic rebellion, but from the deep, labyrinthine, and often bewildering world of European fringe masonry. It was a secret that had been nurtured in German and Austrian lodges, a teaching that claimed to be the final, ultimate key to all esoteric wisdom. This was the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Order of the Temple of the East. Before it was the Church of Crowley's Thelema, it was a German secret. The spiritual father of the O.T.O was a man very different from Aleister Crowley. His name was Karl Kellner. Kellner was a wealthy and successful Austrian industrialist, a paper chemist who had made a considerable fortune. But his true passion was not commerce. It was the pursuit of esoteric knowledge. Kellner was a man of immense and diverse learning. He was a high-ranking Freemason, deeply involved in the irregular quasi-Masonic groups that flourished in Europe at the time, particularly the Rite of Memphis and Mizraim. He was also a serious student of Eastern mysticism. He practiced yoga and traveled extensively through Europe, North America, and the Near East. According to the Order's traditional history, it was during these travels that Kellner had a profound breakthrough. He claimed to have been initiated by three adepts, a Sufi mystic, and two Hindu tantrics revealed to him the supreme secret of nature, the grand arcanum of magic. This secret, he believed, was a practical technique of sexual magic, a method of harnessing the immense power of human sexual energy and transmuting it into a vehicle for spiritual illumination and personal power. Kellner became convinced that this secret was the single, hidden key that could unlock the symbolism of all esoteric systems. He believed it was the lost word of Freemasonry, the true meaning behind the alchemist's philosopher's stone, the real secret of the Knights Templar, and the central teaching of the Rosicrucians. All the allegories and symbols of the past, he now understood, were just veils, designed to both conceal and reveal this one, profound, practical technique. Kellner did not envision a mass movement. His idea was to create a small, elite inner circle, an Academia Masonica, a Masonic academy. This academy would be open only to high-ranking Freemasons who had already proven their dedication and worth. To this select group, he would entrust his great secret. This inner circle, he decided, would be called the Ordo Templi Orientis. The name was chosen to suggest a lineage connected to the Knights Templar, who were rumored to have brought back secret wisdom from the East. Kellner discussed his plans with a close associate, a German occultist named Theodor Reuss. Together, they began to lay the groundwork for their new order. But in 1905, before the academy could be fully realized, Karl Kellner died. The great secret was now in the hands of his less stable, but far more ambitious partner. Theodor Reuss was a very different character from the scholarly and reserved Kellner. Reuss was a man of many hats and questionable careers. He had been a journalist, a theatrical singer, and, some whispered, a spy for the German secret police. He was also a tireless, almost manic, promoter and organizer of fringe Masonic groups. He seemed to collect Masonic charters and grand titles the way other men collected stamps. Upon Kellner's death, Reuss took control of the O.T.O. and began to transform it from Kellner's vision of a private, elite academy into a public international occult order. He drafted a constitution, designed a system of 10 degrees, and began issuing charters for O.T.O. lodges or camps across Europe. The early O.T.O., as shaped by Reuss, was a curious and eclectic beast. Its outer degrees, from the 0th to the 6th, were essentially a repackaging of standard Masonic rituals and symbolism, designed to attract Freemasons who were looking for something more. The rituals were elaborate, the titles were grand, but the teachings were largely conventional Masonic philosophy. The true secrets, Reuss claimed, were reserved for the order's highest, hermetic degrees. In the 7th and 8th degrees, the initiate was introduced to the philosophical and intellectual aspects of Kellner's secret. But it was in the 9th degree that the veil was finally lifted. Here, the initiate was taught the full, practical technique of the order's supreme secret. The use of sexual energy, in both a solitary and a partnered form, as a magical sacrament, an engine for achieving mystical states and accomplishing magical goals. This was the sovereign sanctuary of the Gnosis. The great secret Kellner had discovered. It was the prize at the top of the initiatory ladder. The O.T.O. was essentially a machine designed to find, test, and prepare individuals who were worthy of being entrusted with this powerful and dangerous knowledge. Reuss was a tireless promoter. He published a journal, the Oriflamme, and sought to establish the O.T.O.'s authority over all of Masonry. But for all his organizational energy, the order lacked a compelling, overarching spiritual philosophy. It had a secret, but it lacked a soul. It was a well-designed vehicle, but it had no clear destination beyond the revelation of its own final degree. The order was waiting for a prophet, a visionary who could take its central secret and place it within a grander, more inspiring cosmic framework. And then, Theodor Reuss began to hear whispers of a brilliant, notorious English magician, an outcast from the Golden Dawn, who was publishing some of the most profound, explicit, and beautifully written occult material the world had ever seen. A man who seemed to be revealing secrets that were not his to reveal. Reuss began to read the works of Aleister Crowley. He read Crowley's journal, The Equinox, with its detailed publication of the Golden Dawn's secret rituals. And he read Crowley's other, more cryptic publications. He became convinced that this Englishman, through his own genius or through contact with his own secret sources, had independently discovered the central practical secret of the O.T.O.'s 9th degree. For Reuss, this was both a threat and an opportunity. It was a threat because Crowley was publishing, albeit in a veiled and symbolic form, the very secret upon which his own order's exclusivity was based. But it was also an opportunity. If this brilliant, powerful magician could be brought into the fold, he could become the O.T.O.'s greatest asset. He could provide the very spiritual and philosophical depth that the order so desperately needed. The head of the German secret society made a decision. He would travel to London. He would confront this English magus. He would see if the beast could be tamed and brought into his temple. The two great streams of modern magic, which had been flowing on separate parallel courses, were about to collide. and that collision would change the future of both Aleister Crowley and the Ordo Templi Orientis forever. By the year 1912, Aleister Crowley had firmly established himself as the enfant terrible of the occult world. He was a figure of public notoriety and private influence. Through his magnificent self-published journal, The Equinox, he was systematically revealing the guarded secrets of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn to the world, an act of supreme betrayal that had made him a pariah among his former colleagues. He had established his own magical order, the A Therefore, as a far more rigorous and demanding successor to the Golden Dawn. And he was the prophet of his own revelation, the Law of Thelema, which he believed was destined to become the new religion of humanity. He was a king in his own self-created kingdom. He believed his knowledge was unique, his revelation supreme. He had no idea that a German secret society, with its own supreme secret, was watching him from across the channel. The head of that society, Theodore Roos, had become convinced that Crowley, this rogue English magician, knew something he should not know. The stage was set for a confrontation, a collision of two worlds that would shape the future of Western magic. The catalyst for this collision, according to Crowley's own dramatic account, was one of his most enigmatic and beautiful works. In 1912, he published a small volume titled The Book of Lies, falsely so called. It was a collection of 93 short, poetic, and deeply symbolic chapters, each corresponding to a chapter of the Kabbalah. The book was a masterpiece of mystical wordplay, a series of profound and often impenetrable spiritual paradoxes. And buried within it, in chapter 69, The Way to Succeed and the Way to Suck Eggs, was a passage that seemed to describe in heavily veiled alchemical language a specific technique of sexual magic. The story, as Crowley would tell it for the rest of his life, is this. Sometime after the book's publication, he was in his London apartment when he received an unexpected visitor. It was Theodore Roos, the outer head of the Ordo Templi Orientis. Roos had traveled from Germany with a single, urgent purpose. Imagine the scene. Roos, the German promoter, the keeper of what he believed to be the most profound secret in all of Freemasonry, confronts Crowley, the great English rebel. Roos accuses Crowley directly. "Sir," he says, "you have revealed the secret of the 9th degree of the Ordo Templi Orientis." Crowley, by his own account, was taken aback. He was a man who had revealed many secrets. He had published the entire curriculum of the Golden Dawn. He calmly replied that he was sure he had not, as he was not a member of Roos's order and did not even know what its 9th degree secret was. Roos, insistent, picked up a copy of the Book of Lies, turned to the specific chapter and pointed. "But you have published the secret," he repeated. And in that moment, as Crowley reread his own cryptic words through the eyes of this German occultist, he had a profound realization. He had written the chapter as a symbolic description of a particular magical technique involving sexual energy, a practice he had learned and developed through his own magical work. He had considered it an important but not necessarily unique piece of knowledge. But Roos, in his very accusation, was revealing something new and electrifying to Crowley. He was revealing that this specific technique was not just a secret. It was the secret, the central, supreme, and most heavily guarded arcanum of an existing international initiatory order. Crowley suddenly understood the true, practical significance of the knowledge he possessed. He had, by his own genius or through the guidance of his own secret chiefs, independently discovered the key that Roos and Kellner believed was the culmination of all magical wisdom. The confrontation immediately transformed into a negotiation. Roos's initial anger gave way to a deep respect for Crowley's magical attainment. Here was a man who had achieved, on his own, what his order was designed to teach only to its most advanced adepts. Roos saw not an enemy, but a potential savior. Crowley was the one man with the magical genius and literary skill to take the O.T.O's stark, practical secret and clothe it in a beautiful and compelling philosophical system. Instead of excommunicating him, Roos decided to recruit him. He invited Crowley to join the O.T.O, not as a novice, but as a master. In a series of rapid-fire initiations and appointments in Berlin in 1912, Theodore Roos brought Aleister Crowley into the heart of his order. Crowley was officially initiated, passed through the degrees, and was immediately consecrated as the Sovereign Grand Master General X degree for the entirety of the English-speaking world, specifically for Great Britain and Ireland. Roos gave him a new title, a name that would head all his official O.T.O documents, Baphomet. This was a name steeped in esoteric history, the mysterious, androgynous idol the Knights Templar had been accused of worshipping. For Crowley it was a perfect fit, and Roos gave him a mission. He tasked Crowley with creating a new, English-language branch of the order. This branch was to be called the Mysteria Mystica Maxima, or M. Therefore. Crowley was to take the German Masonic rituals of the O.T.O and revise them, making them suitable for an English audience. He was given a free hand to rewrite the order in his own image. This was the moment Crowley had been waiting for. The Golden Dawn had rejected him. His own order, the A therefore, was designed for solitary practitioners and was too demanding for a mass membership. But the O.T.O was a perfect, ready-made vehicle. It was an international fraternal organization with a system of lodges, a structure of degrees, and, most importantly, a central secret that aligned perfectly with his own magical discoveries. He embraced his new role with characteristic energy. He saw that the O.T.O could become the outer order or the public face of his own, more rarefied teachings. It would be the great recruiting ground, the church for the masses that would introduce the world to his new gospel, the law of Thelema. He immediately began to rewrite the order's identity. He drafted a new manifesto for his M therefore, which for the first time, publicly connected the O.T.O to the law of Thelema. He declared that the goal of the order was to promote the principles of do what thou wilt. The journey through the O.T.O's degrees, he decreed, would now be interpreted as a symbolic journey of self-discovery, of finding and fulfilling one's own true will. The collision was complete. The German secret society, with its Masonic roots and its single, practical secret of sexual magic, had merged with the English prophet and his new law of radical individual liberty. The body of the O.T.O had found its new, Thelemic soul. It would never be the same again. Theodore Roos had invited a tiger into his temple, hoping it would become a guardian. He had no way of knowing that the tiger would soon consume the temple and its keeper, and build a new one in its place. Aleister Crowley did not come to the Ordo Templi Orientis as a humble student seeking to learn its secrets. He came as a prophet, armed with a revelation he believed was destined to overturn the spiritual foundations of the world. He did not intend to simply lead the O.T.O. He intended to convert it. The order had a structure, a hierarchy, and a secret. Crowley would provide it with a new scripture, a new God, and a new law. That law was Thelema. To understand the O.T.O as it exists today, we must first understand the revelation that captured and redefined it. We must travel back 8 years before Crowley's meeting with Roos, to a hotel room in Cairo, and to the 3 fateful days in April 1904 when Crowley claimed that human history had been forever altered. Crowley was in Cairo on his honeymoon with his new wife, Rose. Rose, who had no previous interest in the occult, suddenly began to enter strange trances. She kept repeating a message to her husband. "They are waiting for you." The entity she was channeling, she said, was the Egyptian god Horus. Initially skeptical, Crowley subjected her to a series of tests, taking her to the Bulak Museum and demanding she identify Horus. To his astonishment, she repeatedly led him past famous statues of the god to a little-known funerary stele, a painted wooden tablet from the 26th dynasty. It depicted the deceased, a priest named Ankaf Nakansu, making an offering to the hawk-headed god Arehoarquit, a form of Horus. The exhibit number of this stele was 666, a number with which Crowley, the self-styled Great Beast, had long been obsessed. His skepticism shattered. He now believed that a genuine magical current was at work. Following Rose's instructions, he entered his hotel room at noon on 3 successive days, April 8th, 9th, and 10th. Each day, for exactly 1 hour, he entered a receptive state and wrote down the words spoken to him by a disembodied voice. The voice, the being claimed, was Iwas, a messenger for Horus. The text that resulted from this dictation was Liber al vel Legis, the Book of the Law. It is a short, dense, and extraordinary work, written in a style that is at once poetic, prophetic, and brutally direct. It is composed of 3 chapters, each chapter spoken by a different Egyptian deity. The first by Nut, the goddess of the infinite night sky. The second by Hadat, the infinitely small, winged point of light at the core of all being. And the third by Arehoarquit, the crowned and conquering hawk-headed god of force and fire. The Book of the Law announced a fundamental shift in the spiritual evolution of humanity. It declared that the previous 2,000-year cycle, the Aeon of Osiris, the age of the dying and resurrected god, the age of patriarchal religions like Christianity with their emphasis on sin, guilt, and self-sacrifice was now over. A new Aeon, the Aeon of Horus, had begun. This was to be the age of the crowned and conquering child, an age of individual sovereignty, liberty, and the joyous realization of the self. And for this new age, Iwas delivered a new law, a new ethical and spiritual code for humanity. That law is crystallized in the book's most famous and widely misunderstood phrases. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. This was not a license for hedonistic indulgence or a call to anarchy. Crowley would spend the rest of his life insisting that it was not do what you like. It was a profound spiritual directive. Thelema teaches that every single individual, every man, and every woman is a star. Each star has its own unique nature, its own true will, its proper orbit and purpose in the universe. The great work of human life is to discover that true will and to do it, and nothing else. To find one's true, divine nature and to express it perfectly, without fear, without doubt, and without compromise. Any action that is not in alignment with that true will is a form of spiritual error. This core commandment was paired with another. Love is the law, love under will. This meant that the dynamic force of love, of union with others and with the universe, must be guided and directed by the true will. It is not a call for sentimental love, but for the willed, sacred act of uniting with all things that are a necessary part of one's own unique path. This was the gospel that Crowley now possessed. And when he took the reins of the O.T.O in Britain, he saw the order not as an end in itself, but as a perfect practical system for initiating individuals into the mysteries of Thelema. The Masonic symbolism, the graded structure, and especially the secret of the 9th degree, all seemed to be a perfect outer shell for the inner truth of the Book of the Law. The O.T.O would become his church. Crowley immediately set to work. He took the existing German O.T.O rituals, which were often dry and convoluted Masonic ceremonies, and began a systematic process of revision. He rewrote the initiation ceremonies for the lower degrees, infusing them with the language, symbolism, and philosophy of Thelema. The journey through the O.T.O degrees was no longer just about Masonic fraternity or philosophical speculation. It was now recast as a progressive journey of self-discovery. The initiate was guided, step by step, to cast off the shackles of societal and religious conditioning, to discover their own true will, and to learn how to manifest it in the world. The lessons of liberty, responsibility, and the sacredness of the individual were woven into the fabric of each ritual. His greatest and most enduring ritual creation for the order was Liber 15, the Gnostic Massachusetts. This was Crowley's masterpiece of religious art, designed to serve as the central public and private ceremony of the O.T.O. It is not a parody of the Christian Mass, but a completely new rite, a joyous and profound celebration of the Thelemic worldview. The Gnostic Mass is performed by a priest, a priestess, and a deacon, assisted by 2 children. The ceremony takes place in a temple designed to represent the universe. The priestess, representing Nut, the goddess of infinite space, sits naked upon the high altar, symbolizing the ultimate union of the spiritual and the material. The priest, representing Hadat, the secret fire within all beings, performs a series of invocations and offerings. The ceremony is a mystical marriage, a celebration of the union of opposites of male and female, of sun and moon, of life and death. Its climax is the Eucharist. The priest and priestess consecrate a cake of light, a small wafer made of meal, honey, and oil, and a goblet of wine. These elements, symbolizing the substance of all life, are then consumed by the congregation. The act is a sacrament, a declaration that all matter is divine, that life itself is a sacred, joyous festival. With the Gnostic Mass, Crowley had given the O.T.O a vibrant, living liturgy. He had transformed it from a secret lodge into a public church. The old O.T.O of Kellner and Roos, with its roots in German Masonry, was fading. A new O.T.O was being born, one whose purpose was to spread the law of Thelema to the entire world. Crowley had not just joined the order, he had captured it. His next step was to create a physical community, a grand social and magical experiment where this new law could be lived, day in and day out, in its most radical and uncompromising form. A new law requires a new way of life. A new gospel demands a new kind of monastery. Having redefined the Ordo Templi Orientis as the Church of Thelema, Aleister Crowley now sought to create a physical heart for his new religion. He needed more than just a temple for occasional rituals. He needed a laboratory, a place where the law of Thelema, do what thou wilt, could be lived out in its most pure, intense, and uncompromising form, 24 hours a day. He envisioned a collegium ad spiritum sanctum, a college of the Holy Spirit, a community that would be the absolute antithesis of the Christian monasteries he despised. It would not be a place of celibacy and self-denial, but of sexual freedom and radical self-realization. It would be a training ground for the new race of Thelemic supermen. In 1920, after years of searching, he found the perfect location for his grand, dangerous experiment. A small, isolated villa near the fishing town of Cefalu, on the rugged northern coast of Sicily. He named it the Abbey of Thelema. The abbey was not a grand, Gothic ruin like the Hellfire Club's Medmenham. It was a simple, one-story stone farmhouse, rented for a modest sum. It was remote, primitive, and exposed to the harsh Sicilian sun. Crowley arrived with a small, devoted band of followers, including 2 of his current Scarlet Women, his magical consorts, Leah Hersig and Nanette Shumway and their children. This was to be the founding community of the New World Order. Life at the Abbey was designed as an immersive magical training program. It was a strange and demanding mixture of extreme discipline and absolute liberty. The central organizing principle was the law itself. Each resident was not a follower in the traditional sense. They were an individual star, tasked with the great work of discovering and enacting their own true will. Crowley was not their master, but their teacher, the guide who provided the tools and the environment for this profound work of self-discovery. The day was structured by a series of rituals. It began at sunrise with a formal adoration of the sun from the Book of the Law. The day's work would then be devoted to the great work. This included rigorous yogic and meditation practices to discipline the body and mind, the performance of complex magical rituals, and the intensive study of Crowley's holy books. Each individual was expected to keep a detailed magical diary, recording their every thought, action, and spiritual experience. But the discipline was paired with an equally rigorous embrace of freedom. The Abbey was a place where all social and moral taboos were systematically broken. Drug use was an integral part of the curriculum. Crowley viewed drugs like heroin, cocaine, and hashish not as recreational escapes, but as powerful sacramental tools, keys to the gate of heaven, which could be used to shatter the ego, explore the hidden corridors of consciousness, and induce mystical states. This experimentation, however, often devolved into simple, debilitating addiction for many of the residents, including Crowley himself. Sexual freedom was absolute. The Abbey was a laboratory for exploring the principles of sexual magic that were central to the O.T.O's teachings. The concept of monogamy was rejected as a slave god morality. Residents were encouraged to engage in sexual relations with whomever their true will dictated, and these acts were often treated as magical sacraments, rituals designed to generate energy or achieve specific states of consciousness. The most intense rituals took place in the Abbey's inner sanctum. Crowley took the main room of the farmhouse and, in a frenzy of creative energy, covered its walls from floor to ceiling with a series of vast, visionary murals. This room became known as the Chamber de Cauchemar's Chamber of Nightmares. The murals were a deliberate journey into the subconscious, a psychedelic landscape of Thelemic cosmology. They were sexually explicit, grotesque, and terrifyingly beautiful. They depicted demons, gods, and scenes of magical transformation. There were images of copulating beasts, of the earth giving birth to a monstrous child, of Crowley himself as the great beast. It was a temple and a madhouse, a sacred space designed to shock the conscious mind into submission and open the doors to the visionary world. For a few years, this strange, superheated community survived, an isolated island of radical magical living. But the outside world could not be kept at bay forever, and the very extremism of the experiment contained the seeds of its own destruction. In 1922, a new disciple arrived at the Abbey. His name was Raoul Loveday, a bright, idealistic young undergraduate from Oxford. He was utterly devoted to Crowley and his teachings. He arrived with his young, beautiful, and far more worldly wife, Betty May. The Abbey was a shock to Loveday's system. The combination of intense ritual, hard living, poor sanitation, and rampant drug use took a toll on his health. In February of 1923, after allegedly drinking water from a contaminated mountain spring, Raoul Loveday died an agonizing death, most likely from acute typhoid fever. His death was the catalyst that brought the entire experiment crashing down. Betty May, horrified and disillusioned, fled the Abbey and returned to London. She immediately went to the press, and the British tabloids, which already viewed Crowley with a mixture of fascination and disgust, found they had a story of almost unimaginable sensationalism. Betty May's account, likely embellished for maximum effect, painted a picture of a diabolical cult of black magic and depravity. She told stories of blood-drinking rituals, of orgies, of animal sacrifice. She claimed Crowley had forced her husband to drink the blood of a sacrificed cat. The headlines screamed. Newspapers like the Sunday Express and John Bull branded Crowley the wickedest man in the world, and a cannibal at large. They portrayed the Abbey as a cesspool of filth, and Crowley as a monster who had lured a promising young Englishman to his doom. The public scandal was immense and ferocious. The scandal reached the ears of the new fascist government in Italy, led by Benito Mussolini. Having a notorious English devil worshipper and his scandalous cult operating on Italian soil was a public embarrassment his regime could not tolerate. In April of 1923, the authorities acted. Aleister Crowley was officially declared an undesirable alien and was expelled from the country. The great experiment was over. The Abbey of Thelema was abandoned. Crowley and his remaining disciples were forced to pack their bags and leave, a small band of exiles. The sacred temple of the new Aeon was left to the elements, its visionary murals to peel and fade in the Sicilian sun, forgotten for decades until they were rediscovered and partially restored after the Second World War. Crowley, now publicly branded as a monster, his reputation in ruins and his finances exhausted, was driven into a long period of wandering and exile. The Abbey of Thelema, the boldest attempt to create a living community based on the law, had ended in tragedy, scandal, and failure. The prophet had been cast out of his own Eden. But the seeds of his teachings, and the organization that carried them, had already begun to take root in a new and even more unlikely soil, the sun-drenched, forward-looking world of Southern California. A fire, when stamped out in one place, can sometimes send a single unnoticed ember across an ocean, where it can land in dry tinder and ignite a new and even more brilliant blaze. After the disastrous collapse of the Abbey of Thelema, Aleister Crowley was a pariah, and the Ordo Templi Orientis was all but dead in Europe. The prophet was in exile, his followers scattered, his great experiment in ruins. The flame of Thelema seemed to be dwindling into smoke and ash. But that ember had already crossed the Atlantic, and it landed in the most unlikely of places. Not in a shadowy occult lodge, but in the heart of the emerging scientific frontier of Southern California. The O.T.O would rise from its own ashes, like a phoenix, resurrected by a man who was building the rockets that would one day take humanity to the moon. His name was John Whiteside Parsons, better known as Jack. Jack Parsons was a paradox, a living embodiment of two worlds that seemed utterly opposed. By day, he was a pioneering rocket scientist. A brilliant, largely self-taught chemist, he was one of the founding members of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, at the California Institute of Technology, or Caltech. He, along with his colleagues, whom the press dubbed the Suicide Squad for their dangerous experiments, made fundamental breakthroughs in the development of solid rocket fuel. The work of Jack Parsons was instrumental in the Allied victory in World War II and laid the direct groundwork for the American space program. He was a man of science, of empirical data, of explosive material power. But by night, Jack Parsons inhabited another world entirely. He was a passionate and devoted student of Aleister Crowley. He believed that the law of Thelema was the key to human evolution. He rose through the ranks of the O.T.O to become the master of the Agape Lodge, the main branch of the order in California. For Parsons, there was no contradiction between these two lives. Science, he believed, was a tool for understanding and controlling the outer physical universe. Magic was the science for understanding and controlling the inner spiritual universe. Rocketry was a way to break the bonds of Earth's gravity. Magic was a way to break the bonds of human consciousness. Both were paths of exploration, of pushing into the unknown, of striving for the heavens. He famously wrote in one of his essays, "Magic is a mechanism for gaining knowledge and power over the hidden forces of reality. Science is one such mechanism." Parsons's home, a grand Pasadena mansion known as the Parsonage, became the epicenter of this strange fusion. It was part magical temple, part scientific salon, and part bohemian commune. The house was filled with a rotating cast of artists, writers, physicists from Caltech, and science fiction authors, all drawn to Parsons's immense charisma and intellect. The Agape Lodge of the O.T.O held its meetings and performed its Gnostic masses there. It was a place of intense intellectual debate, wild parties, and even wilder magical rituals. It was in this superheated environment that Parsons, in 1945, decided to embark on his most ambitious and dangerous magical operation. He felt that the world, shattered by the Second World War, was ready for the next stage of the Thelemic plan. He believed it was time to actively invoke and incarnate a divine feminine principle, a goddess form described in Crowley's holy books as Babylon, the Scarlet Woman, the Sacred Whore, the goddess of love, freedom, and cosmic passion. He wanted to bring this raw, powerful, and transformative energy into the world by finding a human woman who could serve as its physical vessel. This series of rituals became known as the Babylon working. To perform an operation of this magnitude, Parsons needed a magical partner, a skilled scryer who could help him channel the immense energies and communicate with the spirits he was invoking. And into his life at this exact moment walked a man who seemed perfect for the role. He was a charismatic, fast-talking, red-haired pulp science fiction writer and former naval officer. His name was Lafayette Ron Hubbard. Hubbard, the future founder of Scientology, was introduced to the parsonage and quickly became an integral part of its strange world. Parsons was immediately impressed by him, writing to Crowley that Hubbard was a gentleman with the most amazing mind I have ever met. Parsons believed Hubbard had immense, untrained psychic gifts. He invited Hubbard to become his partner in the Babylon working. For weeks, the two men performed intense magical rituals together. Parsons would perform the invocations, while Hubbard would act as the scryer, staring into a magical speculum and reporting the visions he saw. Their rituals involved chanting, the use of magical tablets, and the playing of violins, all designed to create a magical vortex that would draw the spirit of Babylon down to earth. The operation, Parsons believed, was a stunning success. Shortly after their final, climactic rituals, a woman appeared at the parsonage who seemed to be the physical embodiment of everything he had been invoking. Her name was Marjorie Cameron. She was a striking, flame-haired artist and actress with an independent, fiercely rebellious spirit. Parsons was instantly smitten. He believed she was the elemental mate, the scarlet woman he had summoned from the ether. They began an intense and passionate relationship. But the triumph of the Babylon working soon dissolved into a story of bizarre betrayal. Parsons, Hubbard, and Cameron entered into a business partnership, a company called Allied Enterprises, with the goal of buying yachts in Miami and sailing them to the West Coast for a profit. Parsons invested his entire life savings, over $20,000 of fortune at the time. And then Hubbard and Parsons's then-lover, Sarah Northrop, the sister of Parsons's wife, absconded with the money and a yacht. Parsons was left betrayed and financially ruined. In a fury, he performed a banishing ritual, standing on the shore and calling down a magical storm to stop their ship. A sudden squall did indeed force Hubbard's boat back to harbor, where Parsons was able to recover a fraction of his money. The friendship was shattered. Hubbard would go on to develop his own science of the mind, Dianetics, which would eventually evolve into the Church of Scientology, a global movement with its own complex and controversial history. The exact nature of Hubbard's involvement and his true beliefs during this period remain a subject of intense debate. But the link is undeniable. The man who would found one of the most famous new religions of the 20th century had first served as a magical acolyte in a Thelemic ritual designed to incarnate a goddess. Jack Parsons' story does not have a happy ending. His association with the O.T.O and the scandals surrounding his bohemian lifestyle eventually caught up with him. In the paranoid atmosphere of the Cold War, he was stripped of his security clearance and barred from working in the rocketry field he had helped to create. His life ended abruptly in 1952, at the age of just 37, in a massive, unexplained explosion in his home laboratory. The official verdict was accidental death, but rumors have swirled ever since, with theories ranging from suicide to assassination. But in his short, brilliant, and explosive life, Jack Parsons had performed one final, crucial act of magic. He had taken the dying embers of Crowley's O.T.O and fanned them back into a roaring flame. He had ensured the survival of Thelema in America, creating a bridge between the pre-war occult world and the coming counterculture of the 1960s. He was the American Phoenix, the rocket scientist who, through his own strange genius, ensured that Crowley's law would not be forgotten, but would instead be ready to find a new and much larger audience in the decades to come. What is the final measure of a man's life? Is it the purity of his character, or the power of the ideas he leaves behind? What is the legacy of a secret society? Is it the organization that survives, or the influence that seeps, unseen, into the culture at large? In the case of Aleister Crowley and the Ordo Templi Orientis, the answers are a paradox of light and shadow. The man himself died in 1947 in a dreary boarding house in Hastings, England. He was poor, addicted to heroin, and publicly reviled as a monster. The great beast, it seemed, had been defeated by old age and obscurity. The O.T.O, after the death of Jack Parsons, dwindled into a handful of scattered, disconnected members. The flame of Thelema seemed on the verge of being extinguished forever. But an idea, if it is potent enough, has its own life. And the ideas that Crowley had poured into the vessel of the O.T.O, the radical call for individual liberty, the vision of a new spiritual Aeon, the potent fusion of sex and magic were about to find their moment. The legacy of the beast was not an ending, but a long, slow-burning fuse. The fuse was lit in the 1960s. As the post-war generation began to rebel against the conformity and conservative values of their parents, they went searching for new philosophies, for alternative spiritualities, for icons of rebellion. And they discovered Aleister Crowley. He became a posthumous counterculture hero. His face appeared, famously, on the cover of the Beatles' iconic album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The Rolling Stones were fascinated by his transgressive image. And Jimmy Page, the legendary guitarist of Led Zeppelin, became a serious collector of Crowley's manuscripts and artifacts, even buying Boleskine House, Crowley's former home on the shores of Loch Ness. Crowley's central creed, "Do what thou wilt," stripped of its complex philosophical context, became a perfect slogan for an age of sexual liberation and social revolution. This renewed interest in Crowley led directly to a revival of his order. In California, a surviving member of the Agape Lodge, a man named Grady McMurtry, produced letters from Crowley authorizing him to take charge of the O.T.O in the event of an emergency. He began the slow, difficult work of resurrecting the order. After legal battles with other claimants, McMurtry's lineage was established, and the O.T.O, which had been all but extinct, was reborn. Today, the Ordo Templi Orientis is a legally recognized religious organization with a robust international presence. It has thousands of members in lodges and camps all over the world. It exists just as Crowley re-envisioned it, as the primary vehicle for promoting the law of Thelema. Its members celebrate the Gnostic Mass, they study Crowley's writings, and they work their way through the initiatory degree system he designed. The church that Crowley built not only survived him, it has flourished in ways he could never have imagined. So what is the ultimate legacy of this strange man and his order? It is, like the man himself, a profound and troubling duality. It is a legacy of both brilliant light and deep, uncomfortable shadow. The light is undeniable. Crowley was a spiritual and psychological genius. He was a master synthesizer who took the complex system of the Golden Dawn and made it his own, producing some of the most beautiful, powerful, and psychologically insightful mystical literature ever written. His philosophy of Thelema, at its best, is a radical call for human dignity, self-discovery, and absolute spiritual freedom. The injunction to discover and enact one's true will is a powerful psychological tool, a command to live an authentic, purposeful life, free from the unexamined dogmas of society and religion. For many, his work has been a genuine path of liberation. But the shadow is just as real and just as long. Crowley's personal life was often a catalogue of human failings. His pursuit of do what thou wilt frequently led him into a life of debilitating drug addiction, financial irresponsibility, and the emotional and psychological exploitation of his followers. He demanded absolute liberty for himself, but often behaved as a petty and vindictive tyrant to those within his inner circle. He championed a law of love, but his own personal relationships were often a trail of wreckage. The line between being a spiritual teacher and a cult. The O.T.O itself embodies this paradox. It is an organization dedicated to the ultimate freedom of the individual, yet it is structured as a strict, hierarchical, semi-Masonic secret society. It teaches a path of self-realization, but demands a series of oaths of loyalty to the order and its leaders. It is a philosophy of pure, anarchic freedom, contained within the formal, ordered structure of a church. This inherent tension between the individual and the group, between freedom and fealty, between revelation and institution is the central, unresolved conflict at the heart of the Thelemic legacy. The story of Aleister Crowley and the O.T.O is not a simple tale of good versus evil. It is a cautionary tale about the immense difficulty of living up to one's own highest ideals. It is a story about what happens when a human being, flawed and brilliant, claims to be the vessel for a divine law. It explores the dangerous, intoxicating borderland where genius meets madness, where spiritual liberation can curdle into personal tyranny, and where the search for God can lead one through the darkest corridors of the self. He set out to become a new kind of saint for a new age. The world, instead, branded him a devil. The truth may be that he was something far more complex and far more human. A brilliant, broken, and revolutionary figure who shattered the pieties of his own time and, in doing so, drew the blueprint for much of the spiritual landscape of ours. The great beast cast a very long shadow, and we are, in many ways, still living within it. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of one of the most controversial and influential figures in the history of modern magic. The story of Aleister Crowley and the O.T.O is a powerful reminder that the path of spiritual discovery can lead to both divine heights and human depths. What are your thoughts on Aleister Crowley? A genuine prophet, a dangerous charlatan, or a complex figure beyond easy labels? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed these deep dives into the esoteric currents of the past, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Driftwood Histories for more tales found adrift in time. We are grateful for your support. Until next time, stay curious.